The first thing anyone noticed was that the dead started answering. It happened in the middle of a ceremony that had been rehearsed down to the second, a quiet, controlled moment designed to honor loss without reopening it. Names of the Mercy of Starlight's crew were being read across the central hall of Treaty Station Halcyon. Each one carried on a soft echo through glass and steel, each one followed by the same respectful pause that signaled finality. 34 years had passed since the hospital carrier vanished at the edge of the Cinder Fold, long enough for grief to settle into history, long enough for certainty to feel permanent. Then the screens flickered. At first it looked like a glitch, the kind that came and went in a station that processed more data than some entire civilizations. But the glitch did not stabilize. It sharpened. The memorial feed dissolved into a single image, grainy and wrong, as if reality itself were being forced through a channel it did not fit. A ship emerged in the distortion, its outline unmistakable even through the interference. Mercy of Starlight. Someone laughed, a reflex born from disbelief, but the sound died halfway through as the image resolved further. The hull was intact, not repaired, not patched, but unchanged in a way that made no sense. The last confirmed sighting of the ship had shown cascading failures, structural fractures, and a trajectory that ended inside a region no vessel had ever exited intact. Yet here it was, drifting toward Halcyon Station as if it had never left. The audio cut in next, not gradually, but all at once, flooding every channel with a voice that did not hesitate, did not distort, and did not sound like someone who had been lost in the void for 3 decades. Treaty Station Halcyon. This is Civilian Medical Vessel Mercy of Starlight. Registry CH-221. We are requesting immediate docking clearance. The hall did not erupt. It went still, because the voice was familiar. People who had never met Captain Joe Lin felt it anyway, the weight of recognition carried not by memory, but by the certainty in her tone. This was not a distress call. This was not panic. It was controlled, measured, and impossibly calm, like someone returning from a journey they had expected to survive all along. The station's systems should have rejected the transmission. They did not. Instead, they did something far stranger. They prioritized it. Every non-essential feed dropped away. Security protocols that had never yielded without authorization opened a direct channel. Docking calculations began running before anyone issued the command. It was as if the station itself had decided that the Mercy of Starlight mattered more than the rules designed to govern it. Then the second message came, and everything changed. Do not let them inventory us. There was no context. No explanation, just 12 words, spoken with the same calm certainty, followed by silence. For exactly 3 seconds. Then the sky outside Halcyon Station fractured. 3 separate jump signatures tore open space at once, each one massive enough to bend the station's sensors into warning overload. Warships emerged in formation so tight and so precise it could not have been assembled in response to the signal. They had already been moving. They had already been coming. The first fleet belonged to the Varelian Combine, their hulls long and blade-like, arranged in a containment lattice older than most species on the station. The second carried the mark of the Orinth Ascendancy, whose ships radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from 6,000 years of uninterrupted dominance. The third was something few had ever seen deployed outside of extinction-level events. The black-veiled constructs of the Drom Collective, positioned not as attackers, but as a closing wall. They surrounded the incoming hospital ship before it had even reached standard docking range. No warnings were issued. No negotiations began. They simply formed a perfect sphere of control, isolating the Mercy of Starlight from the rest of known space. Inside the hall, the final name on the memorial list was still echoing. Mira Holt. Nara Holt did not remember moving. One moment she was standing among diplomats and observers. The next, she was at the edge of the control pit, hands braced against a console she did not have clearance to touch. Her pulse hammered in her ears, not because of the fleets, not because of the impossible ship, but because of the data scrolling across the screen in front of her. Crew manifest. Active. Status. Stable. Biological signatures. Confirmed. Her sister's ID was no longer marked deceased. It was transmitting in real time. Behind her, the station erupted into motion at last. Alarms cascading, command voices overlapping, protocols colliding with each other as if the system could not decide whether this was a rescue, a breach, or the beginning of something far worse. Security teams flooded the corridors. Diplomatic channels lit up with demands and denials. Every major species on the station began issuing simultaneous claims of jurisdiction. And still, the mercy of Starlight did not accelerate, did not evade, did not respond to the fleets that had caged it. It drifted forward, calmly, as if the warships did not matter, as if the entire situation had already been decided somewhere else. Nara forced her eyes back to the feed, to the image of the ship that had taken her sister away and now carried her back from a place no one survived. The hull shimmered faintly, not with damage, but with something that refused to settle into a single color, like light itself could not agree on what it was seeing. "What did you bring back?" she whispered, not realizing she had spoken aloud. The answer did not come from the screen. It came from the station's core systems. A new priority flag appeared, overriding every command in the queue, every military protocol, every diplomatic lockout. It did not belong to any known authority. It did not match any language in the station's database. But every system understood it. Incoming vessel classified as non-hostile. Incoming vessel classified as non-containable. Incoming vessel classified as... The line cut off mid-definition. Outside, the fleets tightened their formation. Inside, the mercy of Starlight requested docking again. And this time, it did not wait for permission. By the time the mercy of Starlight crossed the outer docking threshold, Treaty Station Halcyon had stopped pretending this was a matter of protocol and begun moving like a place that understood. History was being forced on it against its will. Corridors sealed in waves. Armed security teams took positions at every pressure junction leading to the civilian docks. Diplomatic observers who had spent their lives mastering the art of controlled expression began failing at it in small, revealing ways, speaking too quickly, standing too stiffly, glancing toward exits they had no intention of using. Outside the station, the three ancient fleets held formation with the silent intensity of predators that did not need to bare their teeth to be understood. Inside, the ship everyone had buried in memory came in with its running lights steady and its guidance path, so precise that not a single correction thruster fired on final approach. Nara Holt stood in the operations pit under emergency clearance she had not requested and knew she had not earned. Someone higher up had attached her to the event the moment Myra's crew ID reactivated, and that meant one of two things. Either somebody on Earth still believed family could make the impossible easier to manage, or somebody believed family would make it easier to break her if this went wrong. Neither possibility comforted her. She watched the docking telemetry stream down the main display, and every line of it made less sense than the one before. The ship mass was wrong by 7%. Internal heat distribution suggested functioning systems in compartments that had been physically destroyed before the Mercy vanished. The drive signature did not match any propulsion architecture in the registry, yet it was being tagged by the station as legacy compatible, as if the systems were recognizing a song whose instrument no longer existed. Then the station received the ship's medical status packet, and half the room forgot the fleets outside. No plague markers, no mutagenic drift, no neurological degradation, no high radiation contamination. The screening suite came back cleaner than civilian baseline, cleaner than military deployment return, cleaner than was statistically normal for a ship that had spent 8 months in known space, much less 34 years beyond it. One of the Orinth observers leaned toward his console and asked for the sequence to be rerun with such careful politeness that the fear beneath it became impossible to miss. The second scan came back identical. A third confirmed tissue health averages that bordered on absurd. Bone density optimal. Cellular repair activity elevated. Stress markers minimal. The Mercy of Starlight's crew looked, on paper, less damaged than the people preparing to greet them. The docking collar locked with a sound so ordinary it felt offensive. No tremor ran through the station. No electrical surge blew circuits. No warning siren announced contamination. The dead ship connected to Halcyon, like any other arriving vessel, and for one suspended second the entire station seemed to lean toward that sealed airlock. Nera felt it in her own body, the enormous pressure of collective attention, of thousands of minds arranged around one impossible question. Were the people inside still human? Had they come back needing rescue? Or had they returned carrying the reason everyone else was suddenly afraid? When the inner hatch finally cycled, the first figures through were not soldiers. They were medics, white and silver uniforms, older Earth Commonwealth pattern, clean, but altered in subtle ways that made Nera's eyes hesitate. The fabric moved strangely, not like armor and not like cloth, but like something that had learned softness without surrendering strength. 6 of them emerged in silence, unhurried, hands visible, faces uncovered. There was no theatricality in the gesture, which somehow made it more disarming. They looked directly at the security lines, directly at the diplomats, directly at the rifles set to non-lethal, and the hidden weapons set to something else, and none of them seemed even slightly impressed. Not arrogant, not reckless, just beyond intimidation in a way Nera had never seen on a human face. Then Mira stepped through the hatch. For one disorienting instant, Nera's mind refused the sight of her sister and tried to replace it with memory. Mira at 26, laughing too hard in a gravity deck corridor. Mira at 30, furious at a committee that wanted to reroute a medical convoy away from an alien border crisis because the numbers no longer looked favorable. Mira in a polished memorial portrait under soft light, the image chosen because it made loss look dignified. None of those matched the woman walking into Halcyon Station now. Mira was older, yes, but not by the number the calendar demanded. There were lines at the edges of her eyes that had not been there before, and something deeper in the set of her shoulders, some new gravity that had nothing to do with exhaustion. She should have looked like a survivor dragged back from the unimaginable. Instead, she looked like a person who had spent years in the presence of something immense and had not been diminished by it. Her gaze moved over the armed cordon, the watching officials, the war readiness of the dock, and settled on Nera with immediate recognition and an emotion so quiet it hit harder than any breakdown would have. Nera had imagined this reunion in every way grief allowed. None of those versions prepared her for Mira smiling first. Not broadly, not brightly, just enough to make it worse. Before Nera could move, before security could decide whether sisters counted as a threat vector, Captain Joe Lin entered behind the medics and changed the shape of the room without raising her voice. She was 70 on station time, if the records held, 40-something by the face she wore, and her composure was almost offensive in its precision. She took in the security layout once, noted the diplomatic cluster, the quarantine rigs, the ancient species observers, and then looked directly at Halcyon's emergency administrator instead of the soldiers surrounding her. "We are not requesting asylum," she said. "We are requesting access to your triage wards." For a few seconds nobody answered, because the statement was so wildly out of alignment with the moment that it broke the rhythm of expected response. The administrator blinked, glanced at the military liaison to his left, and said the only thing available to a man whose authority had just been bypassed by events larger than himself. He asked why. Captain Lin turned her head slightly toward the far side of the station, toward sectors no one in that dock should have known were in crisis. Because Deck 9 oxygen reclamation is about to cascade into pediatric intensive care, she said, calm as weather. Because 4 of your surgical support cradles are already running incorrect compensation values, and 2 children will die when the backup grid shifts. Because your people are trying to solve each failure separately, when they are all being caused by one structural disharmony 3 decks below the utility spine. The administrator stared at her. Then every display in the dock lit red. Deck 9, oxygen reclamation fault. Pediatric intensive care at risk. Surgical support systems unstable. Utility spine overload warning. The room did not react all at once. It fractured by profession. Medics jerked toward comms. Engineers swore and began pulling schematics. Security teams hesitated between maintaining control and recognizing they were no longer the most relevant force in the room. Nara looked at Mira, because that was the only thing she could think to do, and saw that her sister was not surprised. She was sad, not frightened, not triumphant, but sad in the way people look when watching others run into a fire they could have been taught to prevent. Captain Lin did not wait for permission a second time. "You can escort us at weapon point if it makes everyone feel safer," she said. "But if you delay another 90 seconds, the first child stops breathing." No one objected after that. They moved, because only monsters choose pride over children while the countdown is visible. Security reformed around the Starlight crew and rushed them toward the transit lifts. Nara went with them without being told to. Behind her, diplomats began shouting into sealed channels, and somewhere above the station Skin the Elder fleets tightened their orbit around Halcyon with mathematical precision, as if the request for access to a hospital ward had just confirmed their worst fear. Mira fell into step beside Nara as the lift doors sealed. Nara could barely get the words out. "What happened to you?" Myra's eyes met hers, warm and unbearably familiar, but carrying a depth that made the question feel smaller than it had a second earlier. "We learned how to hear what systems are begging for," she said softly. "And they know exactly what that means if anyone else learns it too." The lift dropped toward the failing wards, and above them 3 ancient fleets prepared for war over a hospital ship that had not drawn a weapon once. The first child should have died before they reached the ward. Nara knew that because the numbers were everywhere by the time the lift doors opened, crawling across emergency displays in red bands of narrowing probability, converting human panic into percentages that looked clean enough to be mistaken for control. Pediatric intensive care had already sealed half its chambers against atmospheric instability, and the recycled air inside the triage corridor tasted faintly metallic, the way station air did when too many systems were failing at once, and every machine was trying to compensate for every other machine's mistakes. Staff were moving fast, but not with confidence. They were reacting, rerouting, recalibrating, isolating one crisis after another, each solution buying seconds while making the larger pattern worse. Captain Joe Lin took one look down the corridor and did not break stride. "Do not separate the wards," she said, and it landed like a command that had already been obeyed by better people in harder places. "Shut down the cradle corrections in rooms 2 and 6, vent the thermal buffers on the neonatal line, and get me whoever designed your utility spine stabilization lattice." The chief systems medic started to protest on instinct. Everyone in the corridor knew that shutting down surgical support during an oxygen cascade bordered on insanity. Then Mira crossed to the nearest support cradle, placed 2 fingers against the side panel as if she were checking a pulse, and looked up toward the ceiling with an attention so complete it made the room hesitate around her. Nara saw no screen in front of her, no visible interface, no command line or projected model. Mira was listening to the ward itself, not metaphorically, not emotionally, but with the concentration of someone hearing structure beneath function. "It is not the oxygen," Mira said. "That is the symptom. Your pediatric grid is oscillating because the lower utility spine learned the wrong correction when Deck 9 was patched last winter. It has been overcompensating for 6 months. Everything critical here is now balancing on an error that thinks it is helping." Nobody in the ward should have known that. Nara saw the chief engineer's face change before he spoke, the professional recoil of a man suddenly forced to choose between defending his systems and admitting a stranger had just described a classified repair sequence more accurately than his own reports. He asked how she knew, and Mira did not answer him, because one of the children in the nearest chamber stopped breathing. The next 10 seconds should have belonged to machines. Instead, they belonged to the Starlight crew. The medics who had arrived with Captain Lin dispersed through the ward with the same unnerving lack of urgency they had shown on the dock, and for the first time Nara understood that calm was not their temperament but one of their tools. One of them slid beside the crashing child, not reaching first for the standard support injector, but for the airflow regulator in the chamber wall. Another moved to the spine feed line instead of the patient monitor. A third took hold of the emergency cradle's support arch and closed her eyes for one impossible half-second, like someone remembering where they had left a thought. Then all 3 acted at once. The chamber stabilized, not gradually, not after visible intervention. The pressure flattening through the room happened with the eerie precision of a correction applied at the level below the one everyone else had been treating. The boy on the bed shuddered, gasped, and then drew a full breath so deep his chest rose like a wave. At the same moment, 3 adjacent monitors that had been climbing toward independent alarms all dropped back into safe range, as if some unseen hand had reached beneath the ward's chaos and straightened a knot no one else even knew was there. The room went silent in the stunned, superstitious way professionals go silent when they have just seen their field violated. Captain Lin did not let them stay there. She pointed to the engineer who had challenged Mira. "Take me to the stabilization lattice," she said. "Now, if you wait until the next cascade, the correction will propagate into life support on the refugee ring." That finally broke the corridor apart again. Orders resumed. Teams split. Halcyon's medical staff were no longer resisting the Starlight crew, but they were not ready to trust them either, which created the ugliest kind of working alliance, one born in real time under public humiliation. Nara moved after Mira and nearly caught her arm before stopping herself. The urge to touch her sister, to confirm with something simpler than vision that this was real, had been growing like pressure behind her ribs since the dock. But Mira turned toward her first, and whatever Nara had been about to say died there. "You came back different," Nara said, because anything deeper would have broken in the middle. Myra's expression softened, though not with surprise. "Yes, that is not an answer. It is the first one." Nara hated how much relief the bluntness gave her. Mira still sounded like Mira when pushed, still had that maddening habit of stepping around the wound until the person asking admitted where it actually hurt. But there was something else now, something almost unbearable in the patience behind her eyes, as if time itself had ceased behaving normally around whatever she had become. Before Nara could press again, an alien voice cut across the ward from behind the security cordon, because she has been contaminated by threshold cognition. The speaker was tall even by Varelian standards, plated in ceremonial gray rather than military black, which made the insignia on his chest worse, not better. Military could be argued with. Ceremony meant history doctrine, inherited permission to be afraid on behalf of everyone else. 2 more officials had arrived behind him with station security and sealed orders in hand. Nera recognized the lead observer from the dock, though his formal title came to her a second late. Archivist Minister Terav Sol, representative of the Elder Council species assigned to historical anomalies. Historical anomalies. As if her sister were a damaged archive crate instead of a living woman, Captain Lin did not turn fully to face him. If you are here to help, choose a sector and start learning fast. I am here, Terav Sol said, each word polished to diplomatic violence, to inform Treaty Station Halcyon that the vessel Mercy of Starlight has triggered Council Doctrine 17. By unanimous Elder authority, all crew, materials, derivative knowledge, and communicative access are now under provisional seizure. The words hit the ward harder than any alarm. Even the humans in the room felt the reaction ripple through the non-human staff, because the phrase was old enough to bypass translation and go straight to instinct. Nera did not know the doctrine, but she knew fear when she saw it. Half the alien medical personnel froze not because they agreed, but because they recognized the sort of law that only comes out of locked vaults and ancestral shame. Captain Lin turned then, and Nera saw something shift in the corridor. Not anger, not panic. Something colder, sharper, almost disappointed. You moved that quickly, Lin said. So you did know what the fold was before we entered it. That silenced him for one magnificent second, not because the accusation was louder than his authority, but because it was precise enough to land where truth still lived. Around them, doctors and engineers and security officers suddenly found themselves looking not just at the returned ship crew, but at the Elder Envoy who had arrived with pre-written seizure authority before any investigation had even begun. Terav's soul recovered too smoothly. The region known as the Cinderfold has long been classified as a total loss boundary. Then why, Mira asked quietly, did your people write laws for those who come back? The question went through the ward like a dropped blade. No one moved. No one breathed wrong. Somewhere deeper in the station, another alarm began to climb. One more failure in a place already fraying. But nobody in that corridor was looking at the monitors now. They were looking at the Elder Envoy. And for the first time since the Mercy of Starlight had appeared, the balance of fear shifted a fraction away from the ship and toward the possibility that the wrong people had been lying for a very long time. Terav's soul lifted the sealed order as if paper and authority could still restore the room. You will surrender all private access logs, cognitive records, and engineering impressions immediately. Captain Lin smiled then, and it was the most unsettling thing Nera had seen all day because it contained no defiance at all, only certainty. We would, Lin said, if that were still possible. Nera turned to Mira sharply, but her sister was no longer watching the envoy. She was staring past the ward wall, past the station skin, toward something no one else in the corridor could yet see, and when she spoke, her voice held the first trace of urgency Nera had heard from her since the dead ship returned. They found us, Mira said. No. Worse. They found the place that answered. For a moment Nera thought Mira meant the fleets outside had received reinforcements, that some fourth ancient power had arrived in silence and taken position beyond Halcyon's windows. It would have been easier if that were all she meant. Warships, even elder warships, still belong to a universe Nera understood. They obeyed distance, fuel, command structure, visible motive. But Mira was not looking at the station exterior displays, and she was not listening to the rising command traffic spilling through the ward. She had gone still in the way she only did when something larger than speech was pressing against the edge of her attention. Captain Lin understood before anyone else in the corridor. Nera saw it in the captain's face, not fear exactly, but the hard inward narrowing of someone watching 3 bad options become one catastrophic one. She turned to the nearest Starlight medic and said, "How far?" The medic's expression tightened. Closer than it should be. Faster than last time. That sentence landed in the ward with the weight of a door opening somewhere nobody had meant to build one. Terev's soul heard it too, and whatever control he had reclaimed after Myra's. Question vanished behind a flash of something far older than political caution. "What did you do?" he demanded, and now there was no diplomacy left in him, only the nakedness of a civilization suddenly seeing its secret fail in public. "What signal did you transmit?" Captain Lin looked at him with a calm, so complete it made the outburst look childish. "We came home," she said. That was enough. The implications hit Nera in jagged pieces. The impossible ship had not merely escaped the cinder fold. Its return had changed the fold itself, or awakened something inside it, or told it where to look. She did not understand the mechanics, but she understood consequence. The elder species had moved to contain the mercy of starlight before it docked, not only because of what the crew knew, but because they had feared exactly this, that the old boundary was no longer staying at the boundary. The ward lights dimmed for half a second and then surged back brighter than before. Across the corridor, emergency displays shed their standard warning colors and replaced them with a system-wide advisory Nera had never seen outside war simulations. Anomalous spatial interference detected. Internal lattice drift. Non-linear signal bleed. The phrases meant little on their own, but everyone in the room reacted as if the station had announced a hull fracture through the heart of its own spine. Then Halcyon itself began to hum. It was quiet at first, more sensation than sound. A resonance felt through the floor and in the bones of the teeth. Nera had spent enough of her life on stations to know the language of machinery, the pulse of ventilation, the shift of gravitic stabilizers, the low authority of power cycling through metal older than memory. This was none of that. This felt like a note the station had not known it could produce until something outside taught it. Myra's head tilted slightly, listening to the hum the way another person might listen to a distant voice in a crowd. "It is touching the station through the old corrections," she said. No one but Captain Lin seemed to understand. "The utility lattice?" Lin asked. Mira nodded once. "And the trauma wards and the relay backbone and anything else built around rigid compensation. The fold is reading the patterns they taught their systems to repeat." That finally gave Nera something concrete to grab onto. Halcyon was covered in old fixes, ancient infrastructure built by elder species, upgraded layer on layer across centuries until no one alive fully understood the original logic holding it together. If the thing inside the fold, or whatever intelligence the starlight had awakened, could move through repeating corrections and inherited system habits, then the station was not merely in danger. It was porous in a way no one had realized. Terev's soul recovered enough to become dangerous again. He turned to station security, voice stripped down to command. Seal civilian transmission routes. Shut down non-essential grids. Isolate the returned crew from all infrastructure access. Full cognitive sterilization authority is now in effect. The phrase struck Nera harder than the doctrine number had. Sterilization was not quarantine. It was erasure made bureaucratic, the kind of term institutions used when they wanted destruction to sound procedural. Around her, Halcyon's senior staff reacted with the grim obedience of people hearing a law older than their own judgment. Captain Lin stepped forward before the first officer could comply. "If you activate a sterilization lattice now, you will not contain anything," she said. "You will teach the interference how your suppression systems think. Then it will move through those too." Terev's soul's expression hardened into the polished cruelty of someone who had already decided that every future death now belonged to the people in front of him. Containment failure is preferable to civilizational breach. The words chilled the ward more effectively than vacuum ever could, not because they were monstrous, though they were, but because he meant them. Nera saw it with sudden clarity. The Elder Powers were not trying to save lives in the broad sense. They were trying to preserve a shape of civilization they had spent millennia building, a shape in which access, knowledge, medicine, travel, repair, and survival itself all moved through their hands first. If the mercy of Starlight had returned with a way around that order, then to them this was not a rescue gone strange. It was a revolt of reality itself. Mira caught Nera's wrist before she realized she had moved. "Listen to me," she said, and for the first time since the reunion the patience in her voice gave way to urgency sharp enough to cut. "They are going to frame this as contamination, then lock us inside a suppression field and take everything slowly enough that no one outside understands what was lost. If they finish building the lattice around the ship, it will tear the attunement out of us." Nera stared at her. "Attunement. That is the nearest word we have. You are telling me they can erase whatever changed you?" Myra's gaze held hers, unbearable in its steadiness. "Not what changed us. What lets us teach. That was worse." The hum in the floor deepened, and this time the entire corridor heard it. Lights trembled inside their frames. A sealed diagnostics panel 3 doors down flashed active without being touched, then began streaming architecture maps no one had requested. One of the Halcyon engineers swore under his breath because the maps were not current station schematics. They were older, cleaner, nearer the original lattice design beneath centuries of revisions. The station was not malfunctioning. It was remembering. Captain Lin saw the same thing and made her choice in an instant. "We do not go back to the ship," she said to her crew. "That is where they expect the knowledge to be. We move it into people." Terev Sol's face went pale under Varelian gray. "You will not distribute this." "We already did," Mira said quietly, and every eye in the corridor swung to her. "Not the method. Not yet. But enough. Every time we corrected a failing system, every time we chose repair over extraction, the station learned a little of the pattern. So did your medics. So did your engineers. So did anyone who paid attention instead of reaching for control." The silence after that felt unstable, as if the room itself had become a question. Nera understood then why Mira had seemed sad in the ward instead of triumphant, because this had never been about a secret device, or hidden cargo hold, or one impossible machine the Council could confiscate and study. The thing that came back on the mercy of Starlight had already begun escaping the moment people witnessed it done properly. Once seen, truly seen, the pattern lodged itself in memory differently, not as instructions, but as a way of noticing systems beneath failure. And institutions built on ownership had no clean answer to knowledge that spread by recognition. The command channels overhead exploded with new traffic. More station sectors were reporting impossible cross-corrections, damaged machinery stabilizing without direct input, old support networks surfacing forgotten design layers. Outside, the fleets shifted formation again, not inward this time, but outward, as if they were trying to wall off not the ship, but the station itself from the rest of the galaxy. Captain Lin turned to Nera, and that alone told her how badly things had changed. She was no longer being treated as the captain's sister, or even Earth's liaison, but as a necessary hinge in something much larger. "We have 48 hours at most," Lin said. "After that, they will finish the sterilization array, and no one on this station will remember enough to understand what was taken. Your people will be offered a private bargain. Before then, power, exclusive access, safety for Earth, in exchange for silence. When it comes, you need to know the answer before they ask." Nera felt the station humming beneath her feet, ancient fleets closing outside, her dead sister alive in front of her, and some impossible intelligence touching Halcyon through its oldest wounds. Then every screen in the corridor switched at once to a council decree stamped with all 3 elder seals. Civilizational threat designation confirmed. Full sterilization preparation authorized. And beneath the decree, already assembling around the mercy of starlight in the dock, a lattice of pale geometric light began to rise. The lattice rising around the mercy of starlight should have looked technological. It should have looked like fields and emitters and all the familiar violence civilizations used when they wanted control to appear clinical. Instead, it looked ceremonial. Pale bands of geometric light climbed through the docking bay in concentric tiers, each one locking into the next with the slow confidence of something designed long before anyone now alive had been born. It was not a prison being improvised. It was a ritual being repeated, and the elder species outside the station were repeating it too well for anyone in Halcyon's corridor to keep pretending this was an emergency response rather than an old fear finally stepping into daylight. Nera felt that truth settle in the room before anyone said it. The Varelian envoy had not merely come prepared for a return from the fold. His people had built for one. Somewhere in the sealed centuries of their archives, there had always been a plan for what to do if a ship came back carrying the wrong kind of answer. That made the warships outside more than frightening. It made them guilty. Captain Lin watched the decree scroll across the screens and did not waste a breath on outrage. "We move now," she said, and her crew responded with the reflexive precision of people who had survived too long together to require explanation. Two of the Starlight medics peeled toward the station's secondary education wing. Another turned toward engineering. A fourth was already speaking quietly to a Halcyon trauma surgeon, not issuing instructions, but asking questions in a sequence Nera did not understand, and the surgeon answered almost involuntarily, as if some deeper part of her mind recognized the structure of the conversation before the surface did. Tear of Soul saw it too. "Stop them," he snapped. Security moved then, but too late and with too much uncertainty. That was the first visible crack in the Elder Order. 30 minutes earlier, Halcyon's officers would have obeyed any sealed doctrine the moment it was invoked. Now, they had watched a dead ship's crew save children, stabilize collapsing systems, and predict failures before Halcyon's own networks. They still moved because command was command, but they moved like people who had begun wondering whether they were protecting the station or helping smother it. Nera stepped in front of Mira before she consciously chose to. It was absurd. 2 security officers and an envoy stood between her sister and a doctrine older than half the species in the sector, and some primitive part of her still thought the right angle of one human body could alter history. Myra's hand settled briefly at the small of her back, not to pull her away, but to steady her. "They are going to offer Earth a deal," Mira said softly. Nera did not look away from the officers in front of them. Lynn already said that. She said they would. "I am saying it has already been sent." The nearest wall display answered her. Before Nera could, a priority channel opened in the corner of the main decree feed, wrapped in Earth Commonwealth encryption, and marked for liaison-level review. Nera felt the temperature inside herself drop. There was a particular cruelty in being right too early. She opened the message. It was brief, elegant, and monstrous in the way institutional language often was when it had been polished by intelligent people trying to make betrayal sound responsible. Earth would be granted restricted protection status, exclusive debrief rights, and first-tier access to all recoverable methodologies associated with the mercy of Starlight, provided Commonwealth representatives cooperated with elder containment procedures and publicly affirmed the necessity of controlled quarantine. Earth would be elevated. Earth would be secured. Earth would be invited upward into the structure rather than crushed beneath it. All it had to do was help close the door behind itself. For one flashing, shameful second, Nera understood the temptation so completely it frightened her. Humanity had spent generations proving itself in a galaxy that accepted its labor faster than its authority. This offer was not merely survival. It was revenge wearing diplomatic perfume. It was finally being led into the room where the future got divided. It was every old humiliation answered by leverage, and that was exactly why it felt poisonous. Mira must have seen it move across her face, because she did not flinch from it. "That is what the fold tests," she said. "Not brilliance, not courage in the way we usually mean it. The moment you can finally keep the thing that would make you untouchable." Nera turned to her, anger rising not at Mira, but at the unbearable shape of the choice. "You are asking Earth to refuse the single greatest advantage in our history." Myra's expression did not harden. It deepened. "No, I am asking Earth not to become the next species that mistakes ownership for worth." Captain Lin stepped closer, and for the first time since the Mercy's arrival, there was weariness in her face, ancient and honest. "We nearly failed that test ourselves," she said. "Not at the end. At the beginning. Everyone keeps imagining the fold opened, because we were noble enough to deserve it. That is not what happened." The corridor quieted around her voice. Even Terrav's soul went still, because some truths carried the gravity of confession. "When we crossed the threshold, the first thing we felt was possibility," Lin continued. "Not abstract wonder. Utility, power, the raw, blinding certainty that everything broken in known space could be fixed if we could just take enough of what was there and carry it home. Every mind on that ship reached for the same answer first. Faster medicine, faster drives, better systems, stronger shields. We were not purer than your people. We were poorer, grief-struck, underfunded, and desperate enough to want miracles very badly." Nera could suddenly see it, the original Mercy of Starlight, plunging into the unknown not as chosen heroes, but as exhausted humans, one loss away from collapse. That version felt truer than any myth would have. Myra's voice joined the captain's, quieter, but somehow more devastating. "The difference was not that we did not want to take. The difference was that when the fold began closing, we noticed why." Nera frowned. "Closing. It does not reject hunger immediately," Mira said. "It allows you to reveal yourself. Every species thinks the first access is permission. It is observation. The more you try to compress what it offers into property, the smaller reality becomes around you. That is why the Elder expeditions came back empty or broken. They treated the threshold like a vault." Terrav's soul let out a sharp breath through his nose. Convenient mythology from contaminated witnesses. Mira looked at him, and there was no anger in it at all, which somehow made it worse for him. "Then why did your people build a ritual prison instead of a quarantine system? Why do you have doctrine for returnees instead of debris? Why is your fear older than your public history?" His silence answered more than words would have. The station hummed again, louder now, and a new wave of system reports lit the corridor. Secondary agricultural domes stabilizing. Refugee ring thermal variance decreasing. Surgical Q mortality projections dropping without formal intervention. The Starlight crew were not on those sectors. They were nowhere near them, and yet the effects were spreading. Captain Lin saw Nera track the reports. "That is the midpoint they cannot survive," she said. "Not that we brought back a machine. That there is no machine." Nera stared at her. Lin nodded once. "The attunement is not housed in an artifact. There are tools that help. Yes, but the real transfer is relational, perceptual, trainable. It works best in groups. It weakens under coercion, and if one power hoards it, it degrades into techniques shallow enough to be useful, but not enough to transform anything." Her gaze sharpened. "They can kill our ship. They can imprison us. But if enough people have seen the pattern done honestly, if enough people begin asking the right questions instead of demanding the right commands, then they cannot fully own what comes next." That was the twist. Not a hidden weapon, not a black vault in the Mercy's core, not one impossible engine that would let humanity dominate every rival overnight. The thing the Elder Powers feared most was worse than all of that from their point of view. It was a method that did not belong to the strongest hand. It could move through clinics, dock crews, research circles, repair teams, schoolrooms, refugee camps. It could rewire dependence itself, which meant Earth's secret offer was not merely selfish. It was stupid, because if humanity accepted exclusive access, it would not keep the deeper gift. It would cripple it into another hierarchy and call the fragments victory. Nera closed the Commonwealth message without answering. Terra's soul saw the decision in her face and reacted with sudden venom. If you reject this, you doom your species to the same disorder that destroyed every civilization foolish enough to open what should remain closed. No, Nera said, surprising herself with how steady it sounded. We doom your species to competition. The envoy's expression changed, and in that instant Nera understood something new and terrible. He was not only afraid of the Fold, he was afraid of ordinary people learning to solve the kinds of problems his civilization had monopolized for millennia. He was afraid of irrelevance. Then Mira touched Nera's arm and looked toward the ceiling, toward the great invisible channels of Halcyon's relay backbone. They know, she whispered. Who? Earth Command, the outer colonies, the station engineers, the trio of staff. Enough of them have seen the shape of it now. Her eyes met Nera's, and for the first time since the dead started answering, there was something almost like hope in them. Which means the Council has run out of time. The station lights dimmed once sharply, then every public channel on Halcyon opened at the same instant, and a voice Nera had never heard before said, in perfect station-wide translation, "First lesson begins now." The words hit Halcyon harder than any alarm had. First lesson begins now. For one suspended second, nobody in the corridor moved because no one knew which authority had just seized a station-wide channel brave enough to ignore 3 elder fleets and a civilizational threat decree at the same time. Then every public display on the medical level wiped itself clean and resolved into a live schematic of Halcyon Station. Not the polished civic model used for visitors, but the deep working map buried beneath it, all structural ribs, utility corridors, thermal arteries, pressure nodes, and ancient patch layers glowing through the newer systems like bones under skin. Nera's breath caught, because the map was annotated, not with commands, with questions. Where is the failure actually beginning? Which system is compensating for a wound it never healed? What happens if you stop correcting the symptom and listen for the pattern beneath it? The text rolled in every station language at once, and below it a second feed opened. A refugee ring air processor 3 sectors away, coughing itself toward collapse while technicians in mismatched emergency gear stared at the display in open confusion. Then one of the Starlight medics stepped into frame, not to take over, but to point. She asked one question, another, then a third. The technicians followed her attention instead of her hands. Their faces changed as they saw it. Not the broken fan, not the clogged filtration vein. The stress echo bouncing back from a pressure regulator 2 decks down, teaching the whole system to breathe wrong. They cut the right relay, vented a compensator nobody had touched in years, and the processor settled with a deep mechanical exhale that rolled through the speakers like an animal relaxing after pain. A second feed replaced it immediately, an agricultural dome with withering nutrient lines. Then a freight spine whose gravitic balance had been drifting for months. Then a surgical queue where 3 failing support rigs had been cannibalizing power from one another without anyone realizing the recursion loop began in a damaged sterilization port. Each time the Starlight crew refused the role of miracle workers. They asked. They redirected attention. They made ordinary people notice what the system was actually begging for. And ordinary people began solving it. The corridor around Nera transformed from crisis point to witness chamber. Engineers forgot to be offended. Doctors forgot to be territorial. Security officers forgot, briefly, which orders they were meant to prioritize. Even fear had to make room for the spectacle of seeing station workers correct failures they had been told required higher clearances, rarer tools, or elder oversight they did not have. It was not flashy. That was what made it terrifying. The demonstration did not promise godlike power. It offered competence without permission. Terrav's soul understood the danger before everyone else did. "Kill the feeds!" he snapped, and now there was no ceremony left in him, only naked command. "Jam all public channels. Lock down relay access. This is mimetic proliferation." No one moved fast enough. Halcyon's network no longer felt like a system obeying ownership. It felt like a structure waking up sector by sector as the right people began asking the right questions inside it. Jamming one channel only opened 3 more. Blocking a screen pushed the lesson into maintenance bands. Cutting station audio shifted it into emergency caption networks and surgical assist overlays and cargo routing notations. The first lesson was spreading the way water spread through cracked stone, not because it was overpowering the network, but because too many useful systems had already touched it and decided it belonged there. Captain Lin took advantage of the hesitation instantly. "Not the ship," she said to Nara, Mira, and the nearest cluster of Halcyon personnel. "They will expect us to defend the Mercy. Let them. The real pressure point is public legitimacy. We hold that for as long as people keep seeing this work." Nara nodded, though the scale of what was happening was beginning to outpace language. The Elder Powers had spent centuries making necessity look hierarchical. Now a dead hospital ship was dismantling that illusion one repaired system at a time. Then the first sabotage hit. Deck 12 lost gravity, without warning. Not from overload, not from field failure, but from a hard-cut cascade too clean to be accidental. 2 seconds later, transit rails on the lower civilians spindle-locked simultaneously. Then 3 oxygen alarms bloomed at opposite ends of the station, too far apart and too synchronized to be organic breakdown. Nara felt the pattern immediately, not because she had Myra's attunement, but because the timing was too theatrical. This was not the station failing. It was someone making failure visible enough to frighten the undecided. "They are building a narrative," Nara said. Captain Lin glanced at her once, approving and grim. "Yes, if Halcyon burns while we are teaching, they call the lesson the weapon." The Elder Councils had shifted from containment to staging. That was worse, because staged chaos could travel faster than truth if fear reached people first. Across the corridor, emergency reports multiplied by the second, all of them designed to produce the same conclusion in the minds of anyone not close enough to see the details. The returned humans had destabilized the station. Mira did not waste time denying it. She moved to the wall display. Palms braced lightly against the cold frame as if she were grounding herself through the station's pulse. "These cuts are too symmetrical," she said. "They are using suppression logic to create instability around the lesson points. Same doctrine, different application." Nara turned sharply. "Can we prove it?" "Not fast enough for everyone," Mira said, "but fast enough for the people who matter first." As if summoned by the thought, a new face appeared on one of the secondary feeds. Narrow-featured, ash-skinned, dressed in the gray of Elder Archival Service. His breathing was unsteady, but his eyes were clear with the terrible calm of someone who had finished choosing and knew he could not choose back. "My name is Talus Vane," he said, and the corridor around Nara went silent, because everyone recognized the species, even if few recognized the individual. "I am Junior Custodian of Restricted Historical Redundancies in the Varelian Archival Lattice. I am transmitting sealed records associated with Council Doctrine 17, the Cinderfold, and prior return containment events suppressed across 1,100 years of public history." Tear of Soul made a sound Nera had not known a diplomat could make. The feed split. Documents poured across every open channel faster than any one person could read them. Expedition notations, redacted withdrawal logs, ritual containment schematics older than modern fleet law, internal debates in which elder counselors discussed not whether the fold was lethal, but whether access to it could ever be allowed to escape controlled species hierarchies. One line repeated across translations and centuries with bureaucratic variations, so slight they became more damning. Unrestricted dissemination would render monopoly structures non-viable. Around Nera, Halcyon changed. It did not revolt. That would have been simpler. It began to tilt. A trauma surgeon who had been glaring at the Starlight crew an hour earlier looked at the documents, looked at the repaired ward feeds, and stepped away from the security line without asking permission. Two engineers on a maintenance channel started comparing sabotage timestamps to doctrinal suppression patterns. A non-human cargo supervisor in one of the public feeds said, very quietly, "We were never the danger." And somewhere beyond the corridor, station civilians began repeating the first lesson to one another without waiting for official channels. Tear of Soul lunged for a local command console and triggered station-wide emergency override. This time, Halcyon answered him. Nothing happened, not because the network had been hacked in the usual sense, but because too many subsystems had already been stabilized by the lesson itself. The old doctrine could still command force, but its ability to command trust was collapsing in real time. Outside the station, the fleets moved, not inward, into firing geometry. Every display facing exterior space updated at once. Weapons warm. Intercept lanes aligning. Halcyon itself was being bracketed now. Not just the mercy of Starlight. The Elder Powers were done pretending this was a quarantine. Mira looked up sharply, as though hearing something beneath even that. "It is still listening," she said. Nera turned to her. "The fold." Mira nodded, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the hull, beyond the fleets, beyond the ordinary shape of distance. "It responded when we came home. But if enough minds choose learning together instead of ownership together, it will answer again." Captain Lin understood instantly, and for the first time since Nera had met her, the captain's composure carried the edge of real risk. "Not a private session," Lin said. "Public, live, before they fire." Nera stared at the firing geometry surrounding the station, at the feeds showing ordinary civilians solving impossible problems, at the documents exposing 1,000 years of buried fear, and understood the scale of the next step with a kind of awe that felt indistinguishable from terror. They were not trying to save the Mercy anymore. They were trying to teach the galaxy fast enough to make the first shot politically impossible. Then every exterior display flashed the same status across Halcyon Station. Elder Fleet authorization pending. Weapons release window 9 minutes. 9 minutes was not enough time to save a station by any method Halcyon had ever trusted, which was precisely why the Old Order believed it still owned the outcome. War fleets could not be argued with inside 9 minutes. Political lies could not be dismantled across species in 9 minutes. Civilizations built on monopoly did not collapse because one archivist grew a conscience, and one dead ship returned carrying a better way to see broken things. 9 minutes was the kind of deadline institutions loved, because it turned truth into panic and panic back into obedience. Captain Joe Lin looked at the firing geometry once, and then dismissed it with the terrifying calm of someone who had already decided that fear was now a logistical inconvenience. "Not enough time to persuade the fleets," she said. "Enough time to make persuasion irrelevant." Nera felt the sentence hit the corridor and rearrange everyone inside it. Around her, Halcyon's staff were still staring at the external displays, at the tightening lines of elder vessels angling toward clean kill lanes that would erase the mercy of Starlight, possibly the dock, and perhaps half the station if the mathematics of caution failed under the pressure of old terror. Yet even now, even under threat of open destruction, the first lesson continued crawling through Halcyon's channels. A dock mechanic on Freight Spine 3 was teaching a refinery crew how to stop a resonance fault from teaching the whole line to shake itself apart. A medic in pediatric intensive care was showing a refugee nurse how to recognize when life support drift began in the stress pattern rather than the failing machine. Truth was moving through people faster than the fleets could classify it, and that, more than the ship, was what made the Elder Order desperate. Mira stepped beside the primary relay console and looked not at the screens, but at the people clustered around them. "We do not need to teach everything," she said. "We only need the first shared act." Nara turned sharply. "Meaning what?" "The fold does not respond to possession," Mira said. "It responds to orientation. If enough minds choose to learn together in public, without trying to own what they are learning, then what answered us before will answer again. Not to me, not to the ship, to the pattern." Terav's soul's face changed with a violence no one had yet drawn from him. "No," he said, and now the word sounded ancient. Stripped of diplomacy, stripped even of species pride, the raw refusal of a civilization watching the one door it had spent millennia guarding begin to open in front of witnesses it could no longer fully control. "You will not create a collective threshold event." Captain Lin's gaze flicked to him, and something almost pitying crossed her face. "You named it," she said softly. "So your people remembered more than you admitted." That was the pivot, not technical, human. Halcyon heard the fear in the envoy's voice and understood at last that the elder powers were not improvising against contamination. They were repeating an inherited response to a possibility they had always dreaded, that learning might stop flowing downward from approved hands and begin rising outward from ordinary ones instead. Nara moved before anyone asked her to. She crossed to the relay spine controls and opened every civilian-capable channel still functioning beneath military priority. Then every medical network, every maintenance education feed, every outer colony open science board, every teaching subnet still alive across Halcyon's mesh. The station fought her for access in the beginning. Then, one by one, sectors already touched by the first lessons stopped resisting. Permissions fell away. Routing barriers bent. The system was not betraying its masters. It was recognizing usefulness faster than hierarchy. "We call it the open session," Nara said, because names mattered when fear was trying to define reality first. Not a command broadcast. Not a doctrine. A lesson anyone can join. Captain Lin nodded once. "Good. Make it ugly enough to be honest." That almost made Nara laugh, which was absurd under the circumstances, and therefore perfect. The old order loved polished declarations, sealed chambers, immaculate language. Honesty under pressure came out rougher than that. Humaner, more dangerous. Across the auxiliary feed, Talus Vane reappeared for 3 seconds, breathless and running, archival gray coat torn at one sleeve. "The deep keys are live," he said. "I've opened you a corridor through the educational lattice and the junior council networks. They will find me in." The feed cut to static. Nara felt the loss physically. Talus had not been the hero type in any story the galaxy would have told about itself. He had been a keeper of buried redundancies, a custodian of things power considered too inconvenient to remember. And yet, in the decisive minute, that was exactly the kind of person history needed. Someone who knew where the lies were shelved. "They took him," one of Halcyon's engineers said quietly. Captain Lin did not look away from the relay console. "Then he bought us time. Use it." The open session went live on schedule, so improvised it barely deserved the word. No anthem, no insignia, no polished introduction from an approved expert, just a station-wide pulse tone. Then Mira Holt, standing in front of Halcyon's central schematic, while the countdown to weapons release burned in the corner of every participating screen. She did not begin with theory. She began with a question. What is the system trying to keep alive that your repair plan keeps ignoring? The line ran out across clinics, docks, farms, classrooms, ship bridges, maintenance bays, and colony shelters in real time. Nara watched feeds multiply faster than she could track them. A lunar desalination crew, a refugee habitat greenhouse, 2 young officers on an outer patrol corvette, kneeling over a failing coolant manifold, a xenobiology student on a teaching station, replaying the line with tears on her face for reasons she probably could not yet explain. The open session was not elegant. People stumbled, misread patterns, corrected too fast, asked bad questions before finding better ones. But they were doing it together, publicly, without asking who would own the answer first. That was when Earth Command called. The priority seal burned across Nara's private pain, and for one bitter moment, she considered refusing it outright. She opened it anyway, because humanity had earned the right to be disappointing up close rather than through rumor. The Admiral on the feed did not waste time. Extraction corridor prepared. Shuttle en route. Remove Mira Holt, Captain Lin, and all Principal Starlight Cognition assets immediately. Destroy public relay integrity if required. Earth will weather diplomatic fallout. Do not squander species advantage for symbolic multilateralism. Nara stared at him. There it was. The second temptation, meaner than the first, because it came wearing her own flag. Humanity had spent generations being underestimated by the galaxy. Now part of humanity wanted to answer by seizing the throne the elders had built and pretending that counted as moral evolution. The Admiral's face remained controlled, reasonable, almost paternal. He was offering survival, influence, a future in which humans could never again be shut out of the room. He was also offering the exact mistake the Fold punished. Before Nara could answer, alarms tore through the corridor. Boarding action, dock ring breach, security seals collapsing inward around the mercy of Starlight. Mira went pale in a way Nara had not yet seen from her, not from fear of capture, but from some sudden internal recognition. They are not coming for the ship, she said. They are coming for me. Captain Lin moved instantly, but not fast enough to stop the next feed from blooming across the station. Dock ring 4 under Forced Elder Authority. Starlight crew resisting nonviolently. Priority target identified. Mira Holt listed as primary cognition bridge. They know, Nara whispered. They always suspected, Mira said. Now they're sure. The corridor erupted into motion. Halcyon security split against itself. Some units moving to enforce council orders, others hesitating just long enough to make neutrality impossible. 2 younger officers from the Orinth liaison team stepped between an elder directive squad and the relay controls with expressions that said their careers were already dead and they had chosen accordingly. One of the Starlight medics shoved a portable node into Nara's hands and told her not to stop the session no matter what happened next. Somewhere in the station, a civilian crowd began physically shielding an open maintenance classroom because the lesson there had just stabilized 3 failing life support couplings and nobody wanted elder troops near it. Then the boarding team hit the corridor. They came hard and fast under sealed doctrine, precise enough to terrify, non-lethal by visible profile, but carrying the kind of restraint tech designed for people institutions wanted intact while they dismantled everything that made them inconvenient. Halcyon's lights flared white under scramble priority. The first officer through the smoke called Myra's name with the awful confidence of someone executing a legal order. Nara moved without thought. So did Captain Lin. So did half the corridor. The next seconds broke into fragments that would never leave her. A young Orinth officer taking a stun burst meant for the relay bank. A Halcyon trauma surgeon dragging a portable projector upright, so the open session feed would not die when the first console shattered. Captain Lin stepping into a restraint arc with the stillness of a person who had stopped confusing surrender with defeat a very long time ago. Mira turning once, only once, to look at Nera with grief and command fused so tightly they became the same thing. "Do not wait for me," she said. They took her anyway. The corridor swallowed her into a wall of armored bodies, sealed shields, and white suppression glare. Nera felt herself lurch forward and get caught by 3 hands at once. One human, one non-human, one oil-streaked station mechanic who had no business being in the center of history, except that history had finally reached the people who kept things alive. "She's the bridge," Nera said hoarsely. "We can't do this without her." Captain Lin, still on her feet somehow, blood at one temple and calm like a blade, turned the portable node in Nera's hand until the activation sigil faced her palm. "No," Lin said. "We can't do it perfectly without her." Outside the hull, Elder fleets reached final firing lock. Across the galaxy, millions were already joining the open session. And with Mira gone, Nera had less than 4 minutes to decide whether an unfinished truth could still be powerful enough to change everything. Nera did not have time to become the person she would need to be, so she became her anyway. The corridor around her was half battle scene, half operating theater, lit by emergency white and crowded with the kind of people history usually forgot to name properly. Medics with burned sleeves, engineers clutching portable nodes, junior officers who had just ruined their futures by hesitating at the right moment, station workers still wearing maintenance harnesses because nobody had thought to take them off before choosing a side. Somewhere beyond the walls, Elder fleets held Halcyon inside a tightening ring of weapons lock, and somewhere deeper inside the station Mira, Holt was being carried toward a sterilization field built by civilizations so afraid of shared knowledge that they had turned fear itself into ritual law. Captain Joe Lin pressed the node harder into Nera's hand. "The session does not need mastery," she said. "It needs honesty before ownership can reassert itself." Nera looked at the shattered relay bank, at the open feeds still multiplying across damaged screens, at faces from worlds she had never seen waiting without permission for the next lesson, and understood what Mira had been trying to tell her since the moment the Mercy of Starlight docked. The Elder Powers had spent millennia teaching the galaxy that progress must arrive from above, certified by those already seated closest to power. But that was not how humanity had passed the threshold. Not by being wiser at the beginning, by being willing to learn in public without controlling the outcome first. So Nera stepped into Myra's place. Her image hit every surviving channel raw, off-center, jacket scorched at one shoulder, eyes too bright with grief and adrenaline to look composed. Good. Let them see what this actually cost. Let them see that no perfect prophet was about to descend from the dead ship and hand down a finished system. It was going to be this instead. A frightened human woman choosing not to close her fist around the first real advantage her species had ever been offered. "We are out of time," she said, and the truth of it made the words larger than rhetoric. "So do not wait for experts. Do not wait for permissions. Do not ask what part of this can be owned. Ask what your system is trying to preserve that your fear is making invisible." She turned the portable node toward Halcyon's schematic and did the most human thing possible under impossible pressure. She admitted what she did not know. "I cannot finish what Mira started," she said. "I cannot teach this like the people who lived it. But I have seen enough to know the first rule. Stop trying to force the answer into the shape of power. Look for the compensation beneath the failure. Look for the wound the system learned to hide. If you are doing this only so your side wins, you are already listening wrong." The line went out. Across the feeds, something answered. Not one thing. Millions of small things. A freight crew on a methane moon pausing over a failing load balancer. and tracing the stress pattern backward until they found the real fracture in a support rhythm everyone had mistaken for normal. A hospital ring over a border colony, discovering that the cause of a neonatal mortality spike was not the incubators, but the old filtration timing teaching the incubators to drift together. A water guild on a drought world realizing their pumps were not overworking because of scarcity, but because the emergency corrections installed 10 years earlier had trapped the whole network in permanent panic. Halcyon was no longer broadcasting a miracle. It was witnessing recognition spread faster than command. Then the first Elder Fleet fired, or tried to. The weapons release sequence reached final authorization, entered execution, and stalled across 3 command decks at once as internal support teams overrode damage precautions to keep destabilizing cooling webs from collapsing beneath the firing load. On another vessel, 2 junior officers who had been following the open session refused to complete target verification because the bracket geometry endangered the very station sectors, now streaming proof of lives being saved. A 4th ship got as far as ignition before a drive harmonics cascade, one its crew had just learned to notice through the session, forced emergency stand down. The old order had imagined war as a clean vertical act, but now the people who kept their fleets alive had begun seeing the systems under the command structures, and the first shot could no longer belong only to the admirals. That was the real break, not victory in the cinematic sense. Something more destabilizing to Empire than destruction. Hesitation. On Halcyon, the corridor speakers burst alive with a voice Nara knew instantly. Mira. It was not live. The delay signature gave that away. A deadman relay, timed or triggered by restraint, routed through Pathway's Talus vein, must have opened before they took him. Myra's face appeared on every surviving display calmer than anyone deserved to look in such a moment, and Nara felt the corridor lean toward her, as if gravity itself had been waiting. "If you are seeing this," Mira said, "then they have done what frightened them most. They have proven they still believe knowledge can be stopped by taking a person." Outside the hull, the fleet ring held. Inside every ship of that ring, crews were now looking at the same face as civilians, mechanics, doctors, and students across the Concord. The fold did not open because humanity was chosen as the strongest, Mira continued. It opened because we crossed the threshold, trying to save lives we did not need to save. We were tired, grieving, underfunded, and afraid, and we stayed anyway. Not because we deserved a reward, because enough of us chose not to turn the unknown into property before we understood it. If you want what came back with us, do not ask how to own it. Ask how to arrive differently. That was the sentence that undid them. Not because it was grand, because it was simple enough to survive contact with ordinary people. Across the feeds, commanders watched their own crews keep choosing repair over obedience. Civilians watched hardline doctrine collapse under the indecency of trying to fire on the very stations, clinics, and habitats now stabilizing through shared learning. The elder councils could still have ordered slaughter, but the order would no longer travel intact. Too many hands it depended on had begun asking the wrong questions for Empire, and the right ones for everyone else. One by one, weapons locks disengaged. Not all from courage, some from caution, some from political instinct, some from pure self-preservation. It did not matter. History often changed because enough motives aligned badly for the old world and well enough for the new one. The ring around Halcyon loosened, first by degrees, then visibly, until the station that had been moments from becoming a lesson in fear became something far worse for those who ruled by control. An example. The corridor doors at the far end slammed open. Mira staggered through them, supported by a Halcyon security officer with a bleeding mouth, and an Orinth lieutenant who had clearly decided treason felt cleaner than obedience. She was pale, shaking, and still somehow carrying that impossible stillness inside her like a lamp no one had managed to extinguish. Nera crossed the distance between them before anyone could speak. When Mira caught her, it was not graceful. It was desperate, human, unfinished, and more real than all the memorial years that had come before. Around them, Halcyon kept breathing. Across the galaxy, the open session did not end when the crisis passed. That was the final defeat of the old order. It kept going, on farms, in clinics, in schoolrooms, in engine bays, in refugee shelters, in council chambers where younger delegates now had proof that half their inherited limits were engineered rather than natural. Tellus Vane's archives spread faster than suppression could follow. Earth Command's extraction order died unread beneath events larger than strategy. The Mercy of Starlight remained in dock not as a captured anomaly, but as the first vessel in a future no species could monopolize cleanly again. Later, much later, people would tell the story badly on purpose at first, because greatness is easier to accept when simplified into myth. They would say humanity returned from the impossible, carrying power the galaxy had never seen. That was true, but not in the way they meant it. Humanity's real victory was not that it came back stronger. It was that, when offered the first unquestionable chance to rule by the same fear as everyone before it did something the galaxy had stopped expecting from power. It opened its hand, and far beyond Halcyon, at the edge of the Cinder Fold, mixed-species ships had already begun changing course toward the place no one would ever again be able to call closed.